5, 4, 3, 2. All right, hello and welcome everyone to another Chat and Learn here with Power to Fly. My name is Mariella Marie, and as always, super excited to roll into this next hour with you all. I had a chance to briefly chit chat with our guest speaker behind the scenes, and I know she's going to drop a lot of knowledge. She's got a beautiful presentation lined up for everyone. So pull out your notepads, stop multitasking on the computer, be present with us so that we can really take advantage of the knowledge that is going to be shared with us in the next hour. And just to get everyone on the same page, I'm just going to go over some quick housekeeping rules so that we all feel comfortable and confident in this next hour. Participation is key. Lots of crazy things going on in the world. Seems like everything is topsy-turvy. Seems like the world is on fire. You could be doing anything else, to remedy those situations, but you're deciding to be with us. So I really just want to tell you, thank you. I see you. I value your participation. Feel free to turn your cameras on if you feel called to do so. This is a safe space and we want to hear from you. This is not meant to be something where, we're speaking at you. We want you to be involved. So please use the chat box. Turn your cameras on if you feel called to do so. If you haven't showered today, it doesn't matter. This is the beautiful thing about digital community. We can't smell you. There's no judgments. If you want to put your virtual backgrounds on, feel free to do that. If you got a cat walking around, feel free to have your cat do a cameo. I love, bringing the humanity to these virtual spaces that we are, experiencing right now together. If anyone has any sensitive information and you prefer to be kept anonymous, you can write me privately in the chat box. You can find me under Mariella Marie. You can write to me privately and I will keep your comment or your reflection anonymous and raise that to our guest speaker. This is being recorded, so if you do hop off of mute, again, I would love for you to hop off mute and share your dreams last night, any tips and tricks that you've had in your experience that you can share with us. Feel free to hop off mute, but if you do hop off mute, you will be featured in our live recording. This is being recorded, so again, I invite everyone to be present with us in this next hour, and then you can rewatch this video later on Power to Fly, and you can multitask and have all the tabs open that you want and do all the multitasking things that you want to do. But right now I'm going to ask for your presence so that we can really make use of this time. The last thing I'll say is that we would love for you to follow on socials and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can keep up with all the great chats we've got in store. I'm just going to take a brief moment to introduce myself, since I know we've got some newcomers here joining the Chat and Learn program at Power to Fly. So I live in Patagonia. I just also want to say happy solstice to everyone, whether you're celebrating summer solstice or winter solstice. Winter is here. I've been saying winter is coming for a while, and now I'm like by the heater here. I've got my tea. I don't know what you all are doing in the global north to celebrate your summer solstice there, but let's really, try to clear the slate, bring our best selves to the table, and just really learn and engage on being emotionally intelligent, by being impactful in our lives and in others. So I love to speak about emotional intelligence. I might bring some of my reflections to that space as well. So feel free to philosophize with me. I feel like we have a lot of room to grow in that area, in the workplace for sure, and at home, of course, as well. So I would love to extend the invitation for you all to support the project that I'm working on that is called the Positive Force Team. You can go to the positiveforceteam.org. You can sign up for our newsletter, keep up with all the great things I've got in store there, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to chat there. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic to our guest speaker who's calling from California, just south of San Francisco. Kim, let us know a little bit about yourself, how you came to learn about Power to Fly, and what you're excited to share with us today. I won't read what's on the screen. I'll pass the mic to you. You can tell us whatever you want.
Well, I first learned about Power to Fly because I was contracting with a client who has some space, has some sites and some job listings on Power to Fly, and they were very, very engaged in wanting to reach and just engage with a lot of women and letting them know that they are a safe place to work. And I found that very encouraging. And so I learned more about Power to Fly that way. And then your CEO and a business associate reached out to me and said, hey, we're starting this DEI network referral, network, a DEI practitioner network. So more and more people on the members of Power to Fly can access people with DEI expertise. And there's a wide variety of us in certain expertise. Mine is on communications, especially for those who are content creators. How can we be using more inclusive language, and how can we be more visually representative in our images, our videos, et cetera. So we're not exclusionary because our unconscious bias is causing a lot of harm. And part of that is performative allyship, as well as today's topic, microaggressions.
Awesome. So I know you're going to share more about your personal journey as you go through your presentation and answer some of these questions that folks have submitted offline. So feel free to sprinkle that in at your leisure there. I just also want to remind folks that we will be reflecting on the questions that you have submitted previous to this chat after the presentation. Kim has been able to weave some of the questions through this presentation. So as she's going through the presentation, be sure to write in the chat box. Again, write to me privately if you want to be kept anonymous. But we would really, really love for you to participate. So again, I've muted everyone upon entrance just to avoid background noise, but feel free to hop off mute. And because we've got quite a few folks here, I would just say, let's please be respectful and have one person off of mute at a time so that we can, be respectful of everyone's time and voice here. So can you just touch on the principal themes that you will be, unraveling in the next hour here, Kim?
Yeah, and I meant to say thank you for allowing me to use my badass photo look there. I have not been able to use that from that photo shoot. So the fact that I'm amongst my people and that I can use my badass photo, thank you very much. Appreciate that. All right, we should all have badass photos, by the way. All of us should have them and use them. So today, I really hope the kinds of takeaways that you'll have is feeling more, empowered, tooled up, skilled up. I want you to feel seen, heard, valued. My very first slide is talking about how microaggressions, it's not you, right? And really helping us understand, that we need to unlearn a lot of what the work that we're doing, especially around DE&I, self-identity, how we make more inclusive and equitable workplaces is a lot of unlearning, as Rachel Carhill talks about, unlearning limiting thoughts around microaggressions, and then identify what are microaggressions. There's a spectrum from some really heinous, comments to the very, very subtle, but still hurts. There's a fantastic video out there that has lots of swear words in it, if that's your jam, called, microaggressions are like mosquito bites. So check out that video. Microaggressions are like mosquito bites, to get an understanding of the impact that microaggressions have, especially after some data that I will be sharing with you today. And then we'll talk about some effective ways to speak up when a microaggression is said, either to you as a recipient of that microaggression or in your presence. Now, it's not going to solve for everything. There are definitely, different scenarios for different things. So these are general guidelines.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kim, for, getting us warmed up for this conversation. As I mentioned in the introduction, actually, I think I mentioned this when we were behind the scenes, this is such a timely conversation. And I guess, the amount of folks that we've got live with us is proof of that. So again, I see that more folks are turning their cameras on. Thank you so much. We believe in visibility here at Power to Fly. So, again, I'm just extending the invitation. If you feel called to do so, turn your cameras on. You can write in the chat box as well. And Kim, I'm going to pass the mic back to you. Roll us through this beautiful presentation. As Kim is presenting, please write your comments or reflections in the chat box, as we do want to hear from you. So Kim, take it away.
Yeah, thank you for that. And thank you for that acknowledgement. I really do encourage people, have a conversation without me through this next hour. Please, full permission, share. There's never going to be this group exactly as it is today. We'll never meet like this again with all in this mixture of people. Take advantage of this really precious moment to be amongst people who get it, who get you, who've been there, and who want to learn more and who want to be better, right? So first and foremost, as I mentioned, microaggressions, it's not about you. You didn't do anything wrong. You aren't too much. And I know that there are a number of questions about I'm being called bitchy behind closed doors or by other coworkers because I spoke up about a microaggression. So, if you haven't read the 4 agreements, read the 4 agreements. That'll help. One of the agreements talks about not taking things personally, and it's still exhausting. And we're going to call that out today, that it's still exhausting because a lot of people, like the video I was just mentioning, microaggressions are like mosquito bites. They accumulate. And if you are especially somebody who is a person of color, a woman, all of that, all the intersectionalities together, you are disproportionately impacted and victimized by microaggressions. And it's completely unfair. And what's key to know is that I know a lot of us code switch, we cover, we dress a certain way, we talk a certain way, we use the jargon, we do all that we can to kind of minimize the microaggressions that we've received at past jobs or in school or wherever we try to change to kind of like lower the threat levels to experience fewer microaggressions, and yet they still freaking happen. And so we're going to talk about some of the reasons for that. But I just really want to make it super clear. It is not you. And I want you to remember that. So as this quote, I hope it resonates with you. What you said about me says more about your consciousness than my character. So what people are saying says everything about them. It has nothing to do with you. And yet it still impacts us. So, that's what we're going to talk about. How do we deal with that? And how do we try to even minimize it even more? How do we drive accountability? But for those of us who get it way more often than other people, allies, people who look like me, we need to be stepping in. We need to be saying more, and we need to be protecting each other more. And there needs to be more accountability in our code of conduct, our employee handbook, our policies, consequences and accountability within our processes, within our workplaces as well. Managers need to be very thoroughly trained on this and know what they have as tools in order to protect their own teams. All right, next slide.
And I love that you're speaking about, essentially, putting the practice in, putting the effort in, and not just, being silent about it. This is something that often comes up in some of the conversations we have on the Chat and Learn program. How can I be a better ally? How can I advocate? And something that a common theme is coming up, silence is basically the same thing as not advocating or not being an ally.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really interested in hearing how you can encourage people to speak up, and however it is that they feel comfortable speaking up. I know we have lots of tools at our disposal these days, so thank you in advance, Kim, and please continue with your presentation.
Well, and we have to weigh the consequences and the benefits, and that's why the employer needs to have our back. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself, but yeah, I love having this conversation with you, Mariella. So I'm looking forward to more of it. Let's level set on the definition of what microaggressions are. First of all, it's a misnomer, in my opinion. They're not micro at all. It's just another pleasant way of saying racism, sexism, sexism, heteronormativity, classism, ableism, all the isms. Right? It's just a polite, corporate way of saying those terms, because there is this spectrum, as I mentioned. Some are really abhorrent and some are really subtle. And there's a lot of people that don't know that they are participating in continuing contributing to microaggressions in the workplace. Most of us don't know that we're saying them. And yet the impact, as you can see here, it's negative messages. It targets persons based solely on their marginalized group membership. How do you know? Facial expressions, gestures, and just to sum it all up, it just feels gross. And when they happen, sometimes they happen from someone we wouldn't expect, in a moment you wouldn't expect. So you're kind of caught off guard. You don't really know. I feel gross about that, but I don't know why. Sometimes we can't connect it. Sometimes what I do in a stressful situation is I go into that freeze mode. There's fight, flight, freeze. I'm a freezer. So where somebody will say something and I'll just freeze. Anybody else? Put it in the chat. How do you handle it? When you hear a microaggression, do you freeze as well? It's just this, I don't know what to say or do in this situation. Next slide. So here's some really specific microaggression examples. Some of these I took from the pre-submitted questions. Some of you were, quite courageous in sharing some of the situations where microaggressions have literally stunted your career. And so I incorporated some of your examples into what you see here. And I would, in the chat, please take a look at these and say, yep, I've heard this. Yep, I've been called that. Just share. And, I'll share a couple of examples from my own personal life. When I got out of college, and I was privileged to go to college, when I got out of college, I went into male-dominated industries. First, it was radio, and rock radio and hip hop radio, top 40 radio, very, very male-dominated. And here I was put in charge of, I was managing people suddenly at 25 years old. Now, my 20s are pretty fantastic. I got free concerts for most of my 20s. So there was an upside. However, the consequences were I had to put up with a lot of microaggressions, especially in rock radio. I was told that I had a nice rack, for example, and that was by a woman, not a man. And then after I left radio, I got into video production, and then I started making my own documentaries. I worked with the Discovery Channel, and I made 9 different, I was an associate producer for 9 different Discovery Channel documentaries. And being out there, all kinds of different, slights and snubs, as the definition talks about, doubting my intelligence, making comments on my looks. I'm 5'10". I got comments on my height and aren't you a model? And oh, you must play basketball. And it was just like, it was all just unnecessary. So I looked at some of them of like, oh, they want to connect. They want to get to know me. That's nice. I just wish that we learned as we were growing up or now in the workplace, better skills to make that connection. So for example, my son, who has autism and epilepsy, speech delay. So he doesn't communicate very well. And with his sister, how he wants to tell her that he wants to play with her is he pushes her, right? They're 10 and 12. They're not like 3 and 4. They're 10 and 12. And he's the 12-year-old. And so I let him know, use your words. And I help him, articulate what is it you're saying? What is it through that push, right? And as I saw him do that just yesterday, actually, it made me connect to what we're talking about today. The way people fumble through in wanting to connect, start a conversation, something, they do it through this push. They don't have the words. But the point is, the objective is to make that connection or have a conversation or something like that, but we don't have the skills to do it. So that's giving the benefit of the doubt, which not everybody deserves, because there's a lot of microaggressions, as we know, and a lot of us have experienced, that are deliberate, that are intentional to harm, to hold us back. I've gotten more microaggressions from women in my career than men. I don't know why, but that's the way my career has gone. So Mariella, anything from here or anything from your personal experience that you would like to share of things that you've heard or experienced yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you for extending that reflection to me as well. We've got a lot of folks dropping in the chat box. The chat box is on fire right now. So in just a moment, I'll read what's happening there. But when you ask that question, how do you feel? What happens inside of you when you experience a microaggression? Thank you also for calling out that microaggressions is a friendly corporate way of basically embodying all of the isms. I feel fire inside, and then I have to remember and reflect that I can either use this fire to burn down the forest, and what benefit is that? Or I can cultivate something inside of me to be able to, embody all of the things that I'm working on embodying, and not be not be persuaded by any kind of, hateful words, or, as we call them, microaggressions. So practicing emotional intelligence, first I started off studying how to be an artist, a performance artist, film, theater, all these things. And I feel like when I decided to go into that field, you have to sort of bring this more empathic side out of you. You have to listen a little more, be a little more self-aware, so that you can say, okay, for example, that quote that you shared in the beginning, oh, this has nothing to do with me. This is totally the other person, putting their reality, just kind of spitting it out at me and trying to make me feel bad. That self-awareness piece is great for something like microaggressions. You can I have learned to put my limits and not take that into persuading me to think twice about what I'm doing in my field. So that's my personal reflection there. I'm going to highlight some things that folks are writing in the chat box here. So in response to your question, what do you feel? What happens when you experience a microaggression? Someone has written, I think, did that really just happen? Right. Jennifer writes, I know it doesn't just happen in the South, but there is a lot of sexism in this region. I wish I responded better, but it nearly turns into an argument for me when I experience it. Latrish writes, yes, I freeze, not because I don't know what to say, but concerned I may be perceived as an angry Black woman, easily offended, etc. Aaron writes, yes, I freeze. I get so angry and have a hard time quickly responding, quote, professionally. Heather writes, sometimes I don't know it happened until later. Then the emotions follow, including anger, that it is so normal that I didn't even realize, that I didn't even know it happened. Dana writes, often asked to be the note taker at
Yeah.
meetings or
Yeah.
even to schedule them. Mari writes, I get flooded with adrenaline and my ears ring. These are just some that are being written here that we've got several folks writing now. And I would just love to hear your feedback so far so that we can continue on with the presentation. Thank you everyone for writing in the chat box as well. I appreciate the transparency.
Yeah, and the ad of weightism, body size, absolutely. None of it's okay. There's this kind of funny, well, not funny, a very interesting and enlightening article by Business Insider. I think it was March 1st of this year. It talked about two people from Salesforce who publicly resigned and posted their resignation letters on LinkedIn. And that led Business Insider to talk about like the 14 most common microaggressions in the workplace. And they go through and describe like, okay, you know, they say the microaggression, do a little blurb on it. And then they say what to replace it with. And almost all of them, it says nothing, don't say it. You know, and there's you know, what I find really cool about what the two people did who publicly resigned from Salesforce was they said, I am leaving because of the microaggressions, because of the racism, the sexism, the classism that I'm experiencing. Now we know, if you're familiar with the tech space, that Salesforce is very loud and visible in the DEI space. They are training other people. They have free curriculum available on their website to teach other companies and individuals how to do DE&I, how to do inclusivity and equity. And that's my whole point of this, not the whole point, but one of the major points that I want to make in this presentation in our time today is that, I think it's on the next slide. Let's try it. Yes, it is. It's the fact that even if you have this inclusive culture, you have a chief diversity officer, you have these commitments, you have things in place, you know, you're really loud about it, you've got a diversity report that you put out, all the work that you do, but if you are not paying attention to the individual employee's experience, then you are doing, it's just, you might as well just, you know, thrown money into the fire. Harvard Business Review has a published study that talks about 94 to 98% of the companies that they surveyed that are 1,000 employees or more, 3/4 or 75% of those employees of these companies who have stated DEI goals, statements, all of that, 75% of the employees within those companies do not feel the benefits of any of that work. Nothing has changed their day-to-day life. They're still inequitable. They're still not getting promoted. They're still being talked over in meetings. They're still experiencing this microaggression. So even when things are happening here, if the strategy is not taking this approach of getting to the manager level, holding leaders accountable in an equitable way, and piercing that individual employee's experience to improve and drive progress at their level, then none of this matters, right? It just feels performative. And it's like, I love that our company stands for this, but my world hasn't changed. I'm still being, you know, called out on my looks or my hair, how I wear my hair or whatever it may be, right? So look at this data. Some people were asking for research on microaggressions. Here's one report that you can tap into. 64% have experienced bias in the workplace within the last year. I actually think it would be higher. I'm actually surprised. The only thing I can think of that I can rationalize on it why it's not higher is because if in these companies that they surveyed was the majority were men, because being a woman, I see this on a regular basis, right? And then you can see the marginalized populations broken down of the percentage of experiencing microaggressions. So if we're not dealing with microaggressions at the individual level, between manager and employee, between colleagues, then our inclusive culture is going to continue to be built on the sand. All right, next slide. So here are some of the impact of microaggressions on us as individuals, or if we're a manager or if we're a leader. You got to know that these are the kinds of things that are happening to our teams if we're not protecting them, if our employer is not protecting them. And the thing is that we really need to also not only, focus on those of us who are victimized by microaggressions, but we wouldn't have victimization if there wasn't perpetrators. We really need to put some focus on those who are causing and saying and doing the microaggressions. That's where the work needs to be. We're just going about doing our job. We're trying to get by. We're trying to succeed. We're trying to be our best and authentic selves because the company said I can do that here. And yet I'm the one that's coached. If a microaggression is said to me and people are coaching me on how to respond to it, let's put our focus on the person where the words eked out of their mouth. There's a consciousness there. There's a mindset there, that there's a privilege there that made them feel it's okay to say what they said if they knew what they said. Now, for the people who are just like, I had no idea that grandfather, that word has such a racist history. I had no idea that powwow is something that's culturally appropriated from Native American culture, and it's not okay to say in the workplace. And the list goes on, right? But we need to understand there's some real tangible impacts to those of us who are on the receiving end of microaggressions, or we're witnessing it, with our other colleagues. You're seeing the list here: negative job satisfaction, diminished loyalty, the lack of psychological safety. It's exhausting, as I was mentioning, all the things that we try to do to assimilate, to minimize any kind of comments. You dress a certain way because you don't want comments on your looks, etc. We're at risk of mental and physical health issues. And for those who are disproportionately on the receiving end of these microaggressions, it's just daily, right? And so as allies, we have to speak up as well in solidarity. All right, next slide. So calling people out, the blame and shame, like you were talking about, I've got fire in me. Mariella, you're saying this, I've got fire in me. Do I burn the forest down? That's kind of the calling out, right? And I get it, sometimes you just want to get up and say, why are you such an asshole? Why? Stop, and there are people amongst us that just don't know. And if they've earned that benefit of the doubt, somebody has to earn the benefit of the doubt, okay? By their reputation. Do you trust them? Are they always trying to do the right thing, but they slipped up? Whatever it is, then let's invite accountability. For the people who are just jerks and they're getting away with it, then that's not your battle. That's where you escalate. Okay, Mariella, any comment or any story you want to share there?
I don't have a personal story because I see that the chat box is on fire. So I want to give space to folks who are joining us here live. And actually, if anyone wants to hop off mute now, I'm going to hold for a light pause to see if someone wants to hop off mute and voice their reflection or question here now. Sometimes it works. Sometimes people need that space to hop off mute. Okay, so please continue, Kim, because I know you've got a lot more to share. But what I will say is I'm getting some private messages about, will this recording be available later? Yes. If you're here live with us, you will be getting a rewatch email with the link to this recorded chat with all the resources that Kim wants to share with you. So don't worry. And then also, I did get a private question here. Someone wasn't sure before this conversation. They weren't sure what DEI stood for. Okay. So maybe you could, for folks who might not be aware of that. I would also personally love to hear your opinion on, essentially, this lip service that's happening. A lot of people are now really interested in, diversity, equity, inclusion, and, they're putting on the good face and getting all these stock photos to show the initiative that they're trying to take. But as you said, within the organization, people don't feel things. So I would love to just get your opinion on, what we can do to really make sure that we are practicing what we preach and not just, having lip service because it is trending, unfortunately, now.
Yes. As of last summer, we had the Great White Awakening, right? And so there's a lot of companies that are much more open, because I've been doing this work a long time, and I've had to try to convince people that this was important for a long time. And I kept being told that it was HR, it has nothing to do with me. And as we've now learned, it has everything to do with everyone, because it impacts everybody and everyone's involved. DEI is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And some companies, coined by Pat Waters, use belonging as well, which is the outcome. That's what we're shooting for. We need, I was talking about unlearning. We just need unlearn all of the freaking obstacles that we've added to make our workplaces inequitable, inaccessible, not inclusive. We have certain language. Jargon sometimes is used as a way of, like, the cool kids at the workplace use this jargon, and if you don't, you're out. It's like high school all over again if we don't disrupt it and help people mature, including ourselves. We got to mature out of this. We got to grow up. We got to be adulting in the workplace, and that's cleaning up our language. So diversity has 40, 50 dimensions of intersectionality, and it's a fact. It's a fact about you, however you want to identify. I identify as cisgender woman. I am gay. I am a mother of 2 kids with disabilities. I am a spiritual practitioner, even though I'm swearing a lot today because I feel very comfortable with you, clearly. I am educated. I'm college educated. These are facts. These are facts about you. And then equity is about access and removing barriers. So equity around the pay gap. A lot of us are very familiar about the scale, the horrendous scale of how women is, depending on what research you look at, it's like 82% to a white man's dollar. And that's white women. And then it gets worse from there, depending what your marginalized population is. So that is inequity in compensation, right? And there's something going on actually in Colorado. I just heard about that this morning, that in Colorado, they're requiring companies to include the salary in job descriptions, so that we can find this, it's not left to, people to negotiate their salaries, right? So this is a step towards equity by the state of Colorado, and it's backfiring because there are some companies like Johnson & Johnson and others who are openly saying in their job descriptions, we encourage everyone to apply except those in Colorado, because they don't want to openly say what the salary is for that particular role. So that's a very interesting conversation right there. Now, I primarily work with professional communicators and content creators, like in marketing, et cetera, video, illustrators, design, brand. That's typically who I work with, but I'll work with anybody who wants to have this conversation. But, those folks, I tell them, visibility drives accountability. And as communicators and content creators, we have that opportunity to bring things to light that are previously in the shadows. So hopefully that helps. Inclusion is an act. It's a verb. It's where we are looking around who's missing from this table. Using a microaggression example, if, I had in the list of examples, mansplaining. So or if there's somebody who is very much of an introvert and they aren't speaking in the meeting, and yet that they have a lot to say. So you're actively inclusive and saying, hey, Mariella hasn't had a chance to share her ideas. I'd love to hear her ideas. Let's make space for Mariella. And so inclusion is really being consciously aware and paying attention, and we're bringing people in. And so hopefully that helps a lot. So let's get into some of the tools and techniques. And again, I want to emphasize, this isn't going to work for especially the most egregious of examples. You're going to have to escalate those. But for those who have earned the benefit of the doubt, and you value the relationship with this person, and you're either the recipient or the witness to this, here's some tips and tricks. All right, we can go to the next slide. Oh, I forgot about this one. So here's some more stats to talk about. This is a survey monkey that was done that asked people, employees, how do you think the aggressors of microaggressions should be managed? And look at that, 67% say, I just want an apology, a sincere apology, not one that starts off with, you just can't take a joke. It was just a joke. That's not an apology. I have a whole training that talks about apology. And Mariella, to your question around, walking the talk and performative allyship, that's a whole other training that I have as well, that talks about like that integrity of what you say and what you do, and how do we make that connection so we stay in integrity around performative and meaningful allyships. But this is a great way to start. Have, when you screw up, not if, when you screw up, because I've said microaggressions as well, right? Then learn how to have a sincere apology. I messed up on a training 3 weeks ago and I had to issue an apology. So I'm leaning on my own training on how to do what needs to be done and mature my own self and how I communicate. So requiring an apology, that's what most people want. I'm sorry I said that. That wasn't okay to say, and I'm taking responsibility for what I said. I'm sorry that I said that. That wasn't okay, right? It can be that succinct. Sometimes you're going to need to escalate. You're going to need to talk to a manager. HR intervention for more of the egregious, or especially those who are repeat offenders, who just aren't taking the feedback. And as you can see, and it ought to lead to termination if it continues, because that is harassment, right? And there's lots of laws around that to protect us about that. Okay, next. So there's this concept of calling in, and I encourage you to look up Loretta J. Ross. She's a professor and she also teaches people. She has podcast interviews where she talks about calling in. And here are some of the things that I've done some research around, and I compiled these opportunities of ways that you can address microaggressions, either when you're the recipient or you see it as a witness. So sometimes you can ask them to repeat, because if they say, hey, can I touch your hair? You can say, what was that? Pardon me? I didn't catch that. And then they might hear themselves and say, well, that was kind of a stupid thing to say, right? Seek clarity. Tell me more about, why you want to touch my hair. There's a million different examples. And my favorite by Dr. David Kampt, who does the White Ally Toolkit, and he's the CEO of the Dialogue Company. He talks about, tell me about a time when you experienced this personally. So somebody is making some sort of a judgment about those people when they do this, right? It might not even be a microaggression for somebody that's in the room. It's just an ignorant, not nice thing to say, that you are a part of this conversation that somebody is saying. This is where you can say, that's really interesting that you think that. Tell me about a time when you experienced that personally. Because what that does is it disrupts bias. It interrupts the stereotypes and makes people think. And they'll either get into self-defense mode, which is probable, because they get into stress mode, and so they're going to fight. Some people fight. They get triggered, they get activated, and they lash back out. Wounded people wound people. As you can see, there's other options here. So screenshot this, you're going to get the recording. So have these tools available to you that you can practice, role play it with somebody safe. And I'm very serious about this. Practice it, because as you practice, it lands, it'll be there for you when you are caught off guard by somebody saying something. Have you ever considered speak your own truth? I don't see it the way you do. I see it as, and when you said that, I felt. And then all the way to set boundaries. Please do not say, so and such again around me or anyone or at this workplace. It's not okay. And just be really clear on that. Now that's when somebody has earned the benefit of the doubt and you value the relationship and you want to take advantage of the teaching moment. And this is also under the assumption that you're not already exhausted by the microaggression. So doing every single time is going to be too much for some people. If I did this, that's all I would talk about all day long, and imagine what my reputation would end up being, right? So that's why allies, other people in the room, y'all need to step in and use these tools as well. All right, next slide. So the net here of this is see something, do something, help disrupt bias. Visibility drives accountability. And it's not about shaming the other person, making the other person feel bad. Something needs to be said at some point. Sometimes it's appropriate and okay right there in the meeting. Like somebody who put in the chat, I'm always asked to take the notes. So, you can respond and say, you know what, the notes aren't my job. Let's share that. Let's come up with a process where we take turns every single week on who takes notes. Or if you see that actually happened to my VP when I was working in house at a tech company. We had an offsite where the head of all of the marketing people and all of the communications people were all in the same room. We were doing an offsite together. Imagine communications and marketing actually talking to each other. It was fantastic. But there's the head, the chief marketing officer and the chief communications officer sitting at the head of the room. The chief marketing officer is a male and the chief communications officer a female. The chief marketing officer, as we started off with an introduction of what we were going to be talking about in the offsite, he turns to the chief communications officer and says, Karen, can you take some notes? The whole room was very mixed, and we were just it was just this awkward silence. And fortunately, somebody else off to the side said, I got it, I'll do the notes. So this happens even at the leadership level in front of, and that guy completely missed what he said. He had no idea, but it was addressed after the meeting was over, and he saw it and he apologized. So there was a teaching moment. We do have to make room for a learning environment. We can't punish people for saying things and trying things, because that's what's causing a lot of people to go into this, like, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. So they end up saying nothing. And that's what typically happens when microaggressions happen on our watch in our meetings, right? Nobody says anything. So here's some ways that I encourage people, again, practice, try it out, do it. But we have to, it's not working. This whole not saying anything, it's not working. People are getting away with it. They're continuing it. We have younger generations coming into the workforce who are not going to have the patience for this. And we shouldn't have the patience for this either, for those of us who've been around for a while. But you can address the person and allow that space for reconciliation in the moment, or say something afterwards. Bring somebody who was in the meeting with you into that conversation to the person. And it's just with that intent of repair, of education. If you want to take that time, otherwise allies need to step in, as I mentioned, but something needs to be said at some point. And I know that there's nuances when you have somebody who's a client and you're the agency, or the CEO is, I know somebody put in a question around your CEO and my leaders are doing the most microaggressions, and they need to be just as accountable as somebody who's at an entry level. And that comes down to the employer having your back, having those conversations. So something needs to be said. Check in with the recipient, but not like, gee, are you okay? Just like, is there anything I can do? How can I support you? I'm going to go and talk to them. Is that helpful to you? Don't assume that going and talking to that person is helpful to the person who received the microaggression. Okay, you need to be in collaboration, not in a savior or a hero role. Okay, and so talk to somebody about it. And make sure that you yourself is a safe space for somebody to discuss what the appropriate next step may be. It could be going and asking for an apology. It could be escalating to a manager and having a team meeting, or it could be, going to HR. Make sure you know what you have as tools that are available to you from your employer as well. All right, next.
I love this. Kim, before we go to the next slide,
Yeah.
I do have a private question I want to flag. And before I get to this private question, can you speak a little bit to, the fear of losing one's job for speaking up, or for, going through one of these steps here to make sure we have a learning time so that we can all grow together and collaborate. One example that really rings true for me right now is back during the civil rights movement, when 2 Black athletes won on the track and Olympic field, and one Australian Olympian also won. I don't know if he was second or third. I don't have my facts right now. But he stood in solidarity with, these Black athletes that weren't being recognized in their own countries, as human and having basic human rights. And he essentially lost his career for making that, very outward move. So we see that, on an Olympian level. And we see that, from, in startups and corporations, in organizations and nonprofits, that fear of losing one's job, and especially now when times are very uncertain. Can you give any advice for someone who might be experiencing that now? Maybe they want to say a lot of things. Maybe they feel like they can't because they might lose their job, and then, financial stability starts to unravel. And so it feels more comfortable being silent, to be safe. Can you speak a little bit to that so that we can encourage folks to speak their truths, and not be afraid? Maybe it's not the right space for them. I know that's hard to try to career pivot or look for another job in these times, but can you speak to that realness, that, even though this example that I spoke about just recently happened, and during the civil rights movement, we still see situations like that happening now. Can you just speak a little bit to that, Kim?
Yeah, absolutely. And those two gentlemen went to my alma mater, San Jose State University. There's now a statue honoring them where they're standing there with their fists up. So some things come around, but yeah, there's a really high price to pay. Look at, Colin Kaepernick, right? He's still not playing in the NFL after all of the statements that the NFL has made in support, right, and solidarity. So that's where the integrity is broken. That's where a lot of companies are in performative. They're not ready to have the hard conversations and making the hard decisions. So therefore, it's landing on us as individuals on making the hard decisions on how much we put up with. And it just kills me to hear that somebody would say it's more comforting, it's more comfortable to not say anything, because otherwise you might be saying, a lot very often, and there's a price and a consequence to that. So that's why I say check in. What do you have that has your back from the employer's standpoint? If there's not enough there, if it's not a psychologically safe place, I have heard hundreds of stories from people who have said, like the Salesforce folks, I'm out and I'm going to seek a company that will have my back, because I want to know. I think is it the next slide actually? Not yet. Can you go to the next slide? Okay. I want to know that I am safe here, that my skin color is safe, that my gender identity is safe, my name is safe at this workplace. That's what I want to know. And that's the kind of accountability that we need to have. And helping companies who are like trying to figure out, how do we do this? A lot of it has to come down to the accountability of individuals' behavior. Yes, we have the compliance training around harassment, discrimination and stuff, but it's the enforcement, and also really adding that subtle stuff around the microaggressions and ensuring that there's a clear and a consistent path, no matter where you are in the hierarchy, no matter how much money you bring in for that company. That's equity. That's an example of standing for equity, that kind of behavior is not tolerated in the workplace, because we're trying to do something we've never done before, which is have an inclusive and an equitable workplace. That's never happened. That does not exist. And yet here we are the generation in the workforce that are introducing that and pushing that. And it is required in order for our companies to stay relevant in the next 25 years, 20 to 25 years, in order for our companies to stay relevant, we have to do this hard work now. So I understand you have to make that choice and keep an eye for another company that is more true to their word in practice of what they say in their statements. But that's the awkwardness right now. A lot of companies are like saying, well, we can't be innocent and naive anymore and infantile in our approach to DE&I and incentivizing our leaders and giving people who have money more money, to hit metrics, right? We have to grow. We know that we have to grow out of that. And yet we're not at that teenage, years, or are certainly not in our adulthood and maturity around DE&I. So we're in this awkward stage of figuring it out. We're all figuring it out, but we have to participate in that at whatever way that feels in integrity for you. Just make sure that you're safe. Ultimately, that's what it comes down to, that you are safe. Whatever needs to happen around you for you and your colleagues to be safe. That's the work that our companies, our managers, our leaders need to go through to ensure that that is happening, not from a compliance standpoint. This is just a casual conversation, as all the examples I shared earlier demonstrate. Was that helpful?
Absolutely. And I just want to let everyone know that time has flown by. We have about 10 minutes left. Kim, I'm going to flag two private questions that are related to HR and micromanagement. Sorry, not micromanagement, microaggressions. Probably also micromanagement is included in there, unfortunately. And actually the startup and corporate spaces. So this first question here, I got fired from one of the biggest tech corporations after calling out my manager's racism. He stated, "We won't hire him because he is Black." One of my coworkers also was in that meeting, but he remained silent. My workspace was not safe to elevate this to HR or anyone. My question in this situation, who can you talk to? I often think HR is not for protecting employees, but employers. I really want to share my story. Is it careless to share these kinds of stories on LinkedIn? So this is the first question. I'll give you a chance to reflect fully on that if you'd like. Oh, I think did we lose our guest speaker? Is she here? Maybe there was something happening with her internet here. Okay, actually, this is a good time I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And as we get our guest speaker back here, folks, I would love to put some of these things into practice that Kim is speaking about by, role playing, finding folks who might, need to have their voices uplifted or at least heard. I would love for you all to write in the chat box your preferred way of connecting. If it is your LinkedIn, great. If it's your website or social media, whatever way you prefer to be connected. And then I invite you all to maybe reach out to a couple folks because clearly we are all interested in this topic and we all want to find ways to work together and kind of, get through this together and make sure that we're being that we're advocating for folks and forming allyship and all that. So please write in the chat box your preferred way of connecting. You can just write your LinkedIn there. I'll also drop mine in the chat as we wait for our guest speaker to come back here. And then we will get moving on with these questions here. We've got about 8 minutes, so please use this time to connect. Perfect. I think we have her back. Kim, are you back? Great.
Yeah.
I always say that, sometimes the tech gods and goddesses try to stop us when we want to speak about really, really difficult and intense matters, but can't stop, won't stop. We will not be silent. Kim, I don't know if you were able to hear that private message. Let me know if I need to repeat it.
I didn't hear the private message, but I am seeing things about HR and how they exist to protect the company completely. I know that. And HR has to change because part of protecting the company is protecting the employees. And because, that was, compliance is in place. So employees wouldn't, do all these lawsuits. There's budget line items, to handle employee lawsuits and all that kind of stuff. If our behavior was better, if there was more of that money put into the training and accountability for managers, for leaders, there wouldn't be a need for a lawsuit. Again, let's focus on the perpetrator, not just on the victimized. Let's put our investment where we can all become out of this better people. So I just wanted to comment on that. I've gone through HR investigations, totally sucked. It was totally imbalanced, totally protected the company, didn't protect me at all. I've been through it, I get it. And HR has to change. All right, so what was the private message?
So basically speaking about how this person called out their manager for basically their manager said, "We won't hire him because he's Black." This person spoke out to their manager and the other coworker remained silent. So their question in this space is, who should we talk to? I often think that HR is not made for protecting employees, but for employers. I really want to share my story. Is it careless to share these kinds of stories on LinkedIn? Is how the question ends. What do you think about that?
Well, employees we're seeing this over and over again. Pinterest, a lot of Yahoo, when they were going through lots of layoffs, a lot of people are going to social media. And I would say that is your last resort. Give your company a chance to do right. When I work with companies, I tell them, if you're not going to do right, employees have every right to go to social media. They want to be heard. They want things to change. And if you're not going to listen to them on the inside, then you're going to have to listen to them eventually on the outside. And that's going to hurt reputation, et cetera. So think about what the motivation was for those two folks at Salesforce to publicly post their resignation letter to Salesforce. Like, what is the motivation there? They wanted change. They're trying to drive change. Now, lots of tech companies have gone through this. And if they're not making that meaningful change, then that's kind of what's going to happen, because if you don't allow those channels of expression for employees to be heard and to see change, you're either going to get these posts externally or you're going to lose those kinds of employees, because that kind of behavior, those kinds of comments, that's discrimination. That's wrong on so many levels. And so if you're in HR, if you're a manager, if you're a leader, you have to take those kinds of comments very seriously, and you have to do something about it. Unconscious bias training, it's not a one and done. I get that. I understand that in every way, shape, and form, but it's a place to start. But you have to continue to be accountable beyond that training. You got to get deeper in the training. You got to put it into your policies and your processes. You got to design your team for belonging. If you're a manager, and you have to hold yourself and your team accountable to the integrity of what is being expected of you, which is to provide a safe place for everybody to be able to thrive. And so if you're not capable of doing that, you're taking a risk, and you're going to feel some consequences that are probably going to be quite unpleasant. And you're definitely going to be losing not only, really high talent, either like not hiring the guy or, the person who heard this, they're going to leave. You're not going to get the kind of talent that you say that your company wants. You're not going to get them, and you're going to lose allies as well. So and you're not going to attract any of them either. So you need to understand that there is a ripple effect. There's serious consequences to making that, to having that mindset unchecked. I hope that was helpful.
So helpful, super helpful. I'm just going to try to squeeze this in, and we've got about 3 minutes, so please try to respond, in 30 seconds. It's going to be a challenge because it's a very chewy question. So another private question here. We observe talk about inclusion and addressing microaggressions across all job functions. Yet I observe HR at startups, how they filter out job applications in order to basically feed candidates to belong to a startup tribe, in quotation marks. Any thoughts on how this can be addressed at startups, where maintaining tribes seems like hiring folks that are the same as the folks there? So basically no diversity. They're trying to kind of maintain this tribe mentality, which in my opinion also doesn't include space to practice intentionally, these processes, because everything goes fast. We want numbers, we want data, we want to be the best on the market. Can you speak specifically to startups?
Yeah, you're going to have to clean that up later, because you're going to become irrelevant, and your product is not going to be accessible for people with disabilities if you have nobody on your team with disabilities, for example. If you don't have women participating in the kinds of decisions that are needing to be made as you're building out your systems, processes, infrastructure, you're going to have to spend more money and replace systems and processes that you have in place later. You're going to have to clean it up, and that's expensive. So get it right in the beginning. What a golden opportunity. Get it right in the beginning. Otherwise, you're going to pay for it one way or another, and it's going to be expensive.
Yes, bring that money factor back into the forefront, right? Like, you're losing out, actually.
Totally. Totally.
We've got about 1 more minute left, and I know we've got the chat box is on fire. We actually have someone that says, please continue this conversation. Let's please arrange for a part 2 of this super important hot topic. So hopefully we can get Kim back here. Kim, any final words, food for thought? Also remind us how we can find you and connect with you when this conversation ends.
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. It's like /producer Kim Clark. Back when I was a documentary producer, that's when I started my LinkedIn profile. I'm at Kim Clark 1, the number 1 on Twitter. And I also run a Conscious Communications or Conscious Communicators LinkedIn group. So if you go to my profile, you'll see that in my About section, where you can request to join the Conscious Communicators group, where I share all the time things that I come across about how to be more inclusive in our communications, so we can build that connection. So happy to do a part 2, and happy to answer any other questions on Power to Fly to make sure everybody gets their questions addressed. I'm just thrilled to have everybody here. Thank you so much. And I guess that's it. Thank you, Mariella. Yes. It was a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you. That's it for now, but let's keep talking. I definitely will support the great work that you're doing. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, everyone, for joining this conversation, and enjoy today's solstice. We would love to see you back on another Chat and Learn. Be sure to find Kim on LinkedIn and support the great work that she's doing. And keep your heads up, everyone. I know this is tough, but we are here to make some beautiful changes. So thank you, everyone. We'll see you on the next chat.
Be here.